Tonight, hang on, kids, as the Dow gets its biggest bounce in 6 years. It's back to the future as word of a super safety net for banks trampolines the markets back up again. I'm Harry Smith. Also tonight, John McCain says heads should roll. He wants the commissioner of the SEC fired. Plus, desperate moments captured on tape after that horrific train crash in California.
We just collided with something, I don't know what. Several people who are injured and bleeding.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie will join us in a moment from the campaign trail. Is the free fall over? In what many are calling the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, everyone from Wall Street to Main Street is looking for a sign that the end might be near. Well, tonight, that sign may be coming into focus. Wall Street seemed to gain a little confidence today as the market rallied in late trading, gaining more than 400 points after word got out that the federal government might have a plan for absorbing the massive pile of bad debt that banks have accumulated. It was the biggest gain percentage-wise in 6 years. But as Anthony Mason reports, don't let that fool you. There was good news and bad news.
The world's edgy markets continued to whipsaw as the Dow went through a 600-point mood swing.
People would like to see a direction, any direction.
President Bush canceled a planned trip to talk with his economic advisors.
The American people can be sure we will continue to act.
And the market soared on reports the Treasury Department is considering creating a resolution trust. That's what the government used to bail out the troubled savings and loans in the 1980s by buying up all their bad debt. But critics say that crisis was different.
The paper, financial paper sold then, was not as damaged in its reputation as the subprime paper is today.
This financial crisis, meanwhile, continues to deepen. Wachovia reportedly is in talks to merge with Morgan Stanley. Washington Mutual is in a desperate search for a buyer, and the credit markets have frozen as banks have become reluctant to loan money even to each other.
I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've never seen the markets this locked up.
With the failure of Lehman Brothers, Paul McCulley says confidence has collapsed.
No one trusts anybody anymore. They still do trust Uncle Sam. Mr. Bernanke and Mr. Paulson need to put Uncle Sam's money on the line to restore trust.
Overnight, the Federal Reserve and the world's biggest central banks pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into the financial system to try to keep the markets moving and the economy from stalling.
If you start a business, you got to borrow money. And if there's no money to be borrowed, people aren't getting educated, they aren't buying houses, they're not building companies.
And that means trouble for the American economy. That's why the Dow went skyrocketing at even the idea of a resolution trust. But that would require congressional legislation, which could take months. And the economy, Harry, doesn't have that much time.
So Hank Paulson, Treasury Secretary, meets tonight. Ben Bernanke, Washington leaders, they want to get this thing together. The time is really of the essence here, isn't it?
Urgency is the key thing right now. I mean, one money manager said to me today, this situation is spiraling down. I mean, we saw with AIG, this can sneak up really fast. Suddenly, like a $40 billion problem was an $85 billion problem. That's what we're dealing with. That's why you have this series of ongoing meetings. There isn't a lot of time.
I remember resolution trust from the late 80s, early 90s. Entire developments were sitting rotting in the suburbs. Giant skyscrapers were empty by the time that came online. Right. How might this help these markets?
The whole idea here is you take all this bad debt, you move it off their balance sheets, and you park it somewhere else where you can get rid of it in an orderly process. That cleans up their balance sheets and makes things move smoothly again. But it takes time.
It does take time. All right, Anthony Mason, thanks. And it's not just an American problem. There's a global squeeze on money today, though. Many European stock markets stabilized after the Fed got together with other central banks to pump $180 billion into money markets overseas. However, Russia's two stock markets were closed for a second straight day after stock prices hit their lowest level there in 3 years. And once again, the economy was the issue in the presidential race. Katie Couric is in Youngstown, Ohio tonight.
Thanks a lot, Harry. Ohio won the 2004 election for George W. Bush, and the state could be just as important this year. All the candidates have been spending a lot of time in the Buckeye State, as well as a handful of other swing states, including Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Obviously, topic A on the campaign trail has been the economy. And as Chip Reed reports today, John McCain came out swinging.
In Cedar Rapids, Iowa today, John McCain slammed the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, accusing Christopher Cox of allowing Wall Street to become a casino for speculators. And he implicitly criticized President Bush for standing by him.
If I were president today, I would fire him.
After stumbling earlier in the week when he claimed the economy's fundamentals are strong, McCain is now roaring back with a harsh attack on Washington and Wall Street.
Mismanagement and greed became the operating standard while regulators were asleep at the switch.
He ripped into Barack Obama for being too close to mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who he said are at the center of the economic crisis.
Fannie's former general counsel is a senior advisor to his campaign. Whose side do you think he's on?
In fact, though, McCain also has advisors who've lobbied for Fannie and Freddie. And while he did sound an early warning on them, he is not known for tough regulation of Wall Street, where the crisis is now raging. McCain is taking his populist attack to crucial battleground states in the Midwest this week: Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The strategy?
There are certainly a lot of Democrats, some maybe who didn't vote in the primaries, but certainly some who did vote for Hillary Clinton, who we feel we have a very good shot at.
Meanwhile, Senator Chuck Hagel, a Republican, says it's a stretch to say Sarah Palin is qualified to be president, asking, quote, "You get a passport for the first time in your life last year?"
Hagel has split with his party on a number of issues. Still, he's one of a number of prominent Republicans who have questioned whether Palin has enough experience in foreign policy. Chip Reed, CBS News, Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Meanwhile, Barack Obama campaigned in New Mexico today and called for the Treasury Department and Federal Reserve to ensure there's enough cash in the financial system. And instead of firing the SEC commissioner, as Senator McCain suggested, he told the crowd that in 47 days, they can fire who he called the whole trickle-down, on-your-own, look-the-other-way crowd in Washington. He also accused his opponent of changing his positions with the wind.
John McCain can't decide whether he's Barry Goldwater or Dennis Kucinich. He's not clear about what he thinks or what he believes.
Barack Obama's running mate Joe Biden spent the day in this all-important swing state, first visiting the Football Hall of Fame in Canton, then talking to union members in Akron. After that speech, I rode with him on the bus from Akron to Youngstown and asked him what 3 things an Obama administration would do right now to calm the panicky financial markets.
If we were president right this minute, 1, explain to the American people what's happened, why we're in this trouble. They don't know. President hadn't said anything, to the best of my knowledge. People got to know, what is it, why are you doing what you, how did this get here, and what are you going to do about it? Secondly, immediately implement a transparency that says that every one of those companies we're given, those outfits that we're given help to bail out, to solidify the market, say, and by the way, here's the deal. We get to look at your books. Don't tell me we're going to lend you the money and me not know exactly what you own and what you have. And the third thing I would do is demonstrate to the American people that you're really going to begin to invest. Stop the things that cause the problem. These profligate tax cuts that are raising the deficit, causing us to borrow money from China to pay for oil from Saudi Arabia. Go out there and tell them you're immediately going to do something about the housing crisis.
You talk about tax cuts, and there's been quite a brouhaha about your comment that paying higher taxes for those making $250,000 a year and over is the patriotic thing to do. Your vice presidential rival, Sarah Palin, Governor Palin, said, to the rest of America, that's not patriotism. Raising taxes is about killing jobs and hurting small businesses and making things worse.
How many small businessmen are making $1,400,000 a year average in the top 1%? Give me a break. I remind my friend John McCain what he said. When Bush called for war and tax cuts, he said, quote, it is immoral to take a nation to war and not have anybody pay for it. I am so sick and tired of this phoniness. The truth of the matter is that we are in trouble, and the people who do not need a new tax cut should be willing as patriotic Americans to understand the way to get this economy back up on their feet is to give middle-class taxpayers a break. We take the tax cut they're getting and we give it to the middle class.
Tomorrow I'll have a lot more as I bring you a day in the life of Joe Biden out on the campaign trail. But for now, let's go back to Harry in New York.
All right, thanks, Katie. The federal government said tonight that Hurricane Ike destroyed at least 49 oil and natural gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. However, that's only a fraction of the nearly 4,000 that are out there. FEMA, meanwhile, has been getting aid to Ike's victims, but with 22,000 Texas residents in shelters and more than 1.5 million without power, it's not fast enough for many. Mark Strassman has the latest.
But you list all your family members.
They all wanted to apply to FEMA. Step one for hurricane victims desperate for federal help, like Lavina Felton.
You're homeless.
Homeless, exactly. So last 2 nights we've practically been living out our cars.
With no computer, no phone, she came to this mobbed room. All this was organized by a local congressman. 5 days into this recovery, FEMA has yet to establish a single application center of its own in Houston. Ike has kept FEMA busy, and its response generally gets good marks here. It's processed 250,000 aid applications already and expects another 500,000 more. But early on, local leaders griped the agency wasn't moving fast enough.
We expect FEMA to honor our request and their commitments.
Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff promised a fix.
Those whose butts need to be kicked will feel it in their butts.
FEMA tells victims to call its toll-free number, but many can't get through.
Give us some money for clothes or something, and we get here, and she says we have to call that number. That number's a joke.
Since Katrina, FEMA has become an easy scapegoat. And all in all, Chertoff says,
I think this has gone about as well as you could expect.
Lavina Felton has made it into the FEMA system. Now she needs shelter.
And no shelter?
We'll be parked in the parking lot, sleeping in the car again.
By morning, FEMA hopes finally to open 5 application centers. More help for victims, including 22,000 Texans still living in shelters. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Houston.
There's more CBS News ahead. Next, the frantic calls for help amid the chaos of last week's California train crash. Tonight, we're hearing the first desperate calls to 911 right after that horrific train crash in Southern California last week. As Ben Tracy reports, the calls were made by passengers on the commuter train as the tragedy unfolded before them.
Train versus another train. People are bleeding and hurt here.
The calls for help were frantic, the scene chaotic.
We have a whole bunch of people who are now bleeding and on the floor. It's the Metrolink train.
That's the voice of a passenger inside the mangled commuter train, quickly becoming a place of horror and death.
Hey, who's that screaming?
That's a person who was in a wheelchair who flew down the stairs. That last car is almost virtually destroyed. I bet you're going to have a lot of fatalities there.
He was right. 25 would die when the Metrolink train collided with a freight train just outside of Los Angeles last Friday.
Obviously, there was almost no time to react.
Federal investigators staged a reenactment of the crash earlier this week. They say Metrolink engineer Robert Sanchez, who was killed, ran a red light on the track and did not apply the brakes before the collision. They have now also confirmed that he was using his cell phone to send text messages while driving the train that day. They have yet to say if he was doing so at the time of the crash.
Aye.
Today, the California Public Utilities Commission voted to ban the use of electronic devices while operating trains. Meanwhile, a memorial today for police officer Spree Deshay, who was killed in the crash, now remembered with her fellow passengers along the line that once brought them home. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Overseas, 7 American soldiers were killed in Iraq today when their helicopter went down. It happened outside Basra in southern Iraq. The U.S. military says a mechanical problem caused the crash, not enemy fire. The Chinook was part of a convoy heading into Iraq from Kuwait. When we come back, Jeff Greenfield's weekly look at the good, the bad, and the ugly in politics. This may be remembered as the week that the presidential campaigns took the emphasis off personal attacks and back onto a serious issue. Senior political correspondent Jeff Greenfield takes a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The financial storms this week did something the Obama campaign had been unable to do for the past 2 weeks: shift the spotlight away from questions of culture and values back to the economy, where Democrats generally fare better. His campaign produced a 2-minute straight-to-camera ad, a rarity in today's 30-second universe, about what Obama would do.
End the anything-goes culture on Wall Street with real regulation that protects your investments and pensions.
Obama got an unintended boost from Senator McCain's response to the crisis, from reassurance
The fundamentals of our economy are strong.
to an attempted explanation,
The fundamentals of our economy are the American worker.
to a proposal that sounded very much like a familiar Washington response to crisis.
We need to set up a 9/11 commission in order to get to the bottom of this.
And at 10:30 that night, the Army came to our house.
This week, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee unveiled an ad in Minnesota in which bereaved parents who lost their son in Iraq point an accusing finger at Senator Norm Coleman.
If Norm Coleman would have stood up to the president and said, "This is not a good idea," maybe he would have listened.
The suggestion that President Bush would have changed course because of a single senator and that the deaths in Iraq can be laid at the senator's door is likely to trigger charges that this ad crosses the line.
Welcome to the Department of Peace.
And in the head-shaking category, a conservative group is ridiculing Democratic Colorado Senate candidate Mark Udall's support for a Department of Peace as a wacko notion from Woodstock Nation, complete with its favorite recreational pleasures. Anybody got a brownie? Well, we'll have another installment next week, Harry.
Can't wait.
Peace and love, baby.
Can't wait for that. Thanks very much, Jeff. In Minneapolis today, the new high-tech I-35 bridge opened ahead of schedule and on budget. It, of course, replaces the bridge that collapsed last year into the Mississippi River, killing 13 people. The new one contains hundreds of sensors to detect problems before they become serious. Up next on the CBS Evening News, why these kids play and love the music that had their parents rocking. Maybe when you were a kid, you played in a band out in the garage. Well, now kids are playing in a whole new way. The sequel to the wildly popular video game Rock Band went on sale this week, and it's actually bringing generations together. Once again, here's Anthony Mason with our Games Children Play.
When 16-year-old Roman Perry became an avid fan of the video game Guitar Hero, his father noticed.
Dad, you want to play? You beat me too bad.
Joe Perry is a real guitar hero. Lead guitarist of Aerosmith. Now the band headlines its own version of the game, and it's already sold more than 1 million copies.
It's taking over what records used to do, you know, at least for bands like us.
In the game, players hit notes in sync with a song to score points. Last year, Guitar Hero and its rival Rock Band racked up $935 million in sales, $100 million more than all digital music sales, while introducing old bands like Aerosmith to new audiences, like 15-year-old Alex Majansky.
I really had no clue who they were until this game.
Sales of the Kansas song Carry On Wayward Son more than doubled last year after it was included in Guitar Hero. Now more and more bands want to get in on the game.
You went to them in the beginning.
We went to the bands in the beginning, yes.
Are they coming to you now?
They are absolutely coming to us now, yes. Because now they understand that this is a way for an entirely new audience to appreciate their music.
So groups like Boston, The Who, and Rush have all signed up with Rock Band.
We're sharing our music to new fans, so that's great for us. And new fans are learning more about the nature of how songs are constructed, which I think is kind of a cool thing.
In effect, you've become part of the music business.
We have.
Alex Rigopoulos is co-creator of both Rock Band and Guitar Hero.
I think more and more over time, people will come to expect to be able to play with the music they love as a core part of how they think about music entertainment.
Aerosmith's Joe Perry is still happier playing on stage than on the video screen.
I don't like to lose.
But he understands that success now means striking a chord with both audiences. Anthony Mason, CBS News, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Katie will be back tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow morning on The Early Show. Good night.